Welcome to this deep dive, everyone. We're going to be tackling a tough subject today, violence against healthcare workers. We've got excerpts from this guide called Medical Defense, and it's meant to help medical professionals, protect themselves. And honestly, some of the stuff in here is pretty intense.
Yeah, it's easy to just focus on those really bad headlines we see. But this guide, it does something different. It digs into why this is happening. And it actually offers some pretty good advice for healthcare workers who might be, feeling a little lost in all of this.
Right, exactly. And you know what I find really interesting? The book, it kind of starts by questioning this idea we all have of doctors and nurses being, untouchable almost. It's like their medical knowledge somehow shields them from the everyday dangers the rest of us face. But the author, who's a security expert, makes this really compelling argument that in reality, that public perception is so different from what it's actually like to work in healthcare today.
It is. And one thing this guide does really well is highlight how we've shifted from seeing patients as patients to seeing them as customers. It's subtle, but think about it. That change in language, it reflects a huge change in expectations and, honestly, a sense of entitlement that can easily turn into conflict.
Yeah, it's almost like the customer's always right mentality is seeped its way into healthcare. But when you're talking about life or death situations, intense emotions, complicated procedures, that whole mindset, it can become really dangerous really fast.
Exactly. It's like a recipe for disaster, And the guide talks about this perfect storm that's been brewing. You've got rising healthcare costs, this constant pressure for doctors to be these miracle workers, and then you add in all the misinformation floating around online. It all adds up.
Yeah, it creates this pressure cooker environment, you know, and you can see how that would take a toll on a doctor, that constant tension. But it's not just demanding patience, right? I mean, the guide also talks about the pressure coming from inside the system itself.
Absolutely. The guide talks about insurance limitations, bureaucratic hurdles, all that. It just adds to the stress. And honestly, it contributes to burnout. And when healthcare workers are burnt out, they're more vulnerable, plain and simple.
It's like they're caught between a rock and a hard place. They're trying to provide the absolute best care, but the system itself isn't always set up to actually support them.
Speaking of support, did you find this whole security ladder concept as interesting as I did?
The security ladder.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. It makes you think about something we don't often consider. Can you really be there for your patients? Truly be present and give them your best if you're worried about your own safety all the time?
Yeah. It's like that thing they tell you on airplanes, put your own oxygen mask on first. You can't help anyone else breathe if you're gasping for air yourself. So how does this security ladder idea translate into things healthcare workers can actually do?
Well, it starts with understanding your environment. The guide, it recommends looking at your workplace's safety history, really analyzing it. Oh, so you mean looking at past incidents, trying to see if there are any patterns, any weak points, almost like a security audit, kind of.
Exactly. It's about being proactive, not reactive. And it talks about getting to know the community you serve. Are there specific risks in your area? And this one might seem a little out there, but the guide also talks about being mindful of how your personal life might be affecting how you act at work.
That's interesting. It's we don't just clock in and out of our emotions, right?
Yeah.
If you're carrying stress from home, it can definitely impact how you interact with patients, with colleagues, maybe even escalate a situation.
Yeah, exactly. It's about being self-aware, managing that stress, setting boundaries where you can.
Okay, this is kind of out there, but they even suggest sending out staff-wide media warnings whenever there's a negative news story about violence against a healthcare worker. Have you ever heard of anything like that?
It's becoming more common, actually, especially now with how fast news, or really any information, travels. It's a way to get ahead of any anxiety or triggers that the staff might be feeling.
Yeah, because those incidents, even if they happen miles away, so they create this ripple effect of fear. Everyone feels more vulnerable.
Exactly. And it's not just about internal stuff either. The guide really stresses how important it is to build strong ties with the community because those strong ties, they can actually deter crime.
Right. It's like having a support network where everyone's looking out for each other.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine a patient stepping in to protect a doctor because that doctor is a respected member of their community. That's the goal. That's the positive impact we're talking about. The guide actually uses the Bumrungrad International Hospital in Thailand as an example. Apparently, they're known for having really strong community ties that contribute to their overall safety.
That's incredible. Now, that's what I call preventative care. But let's be real. Even with the best preventative measures, sometimes things are still going to get tense. How does the guide recommend healthcare workers handle those tricky interpersonal situations?
One of the things I found most fascinating about this guide is its emphasis on body language. It really gets into how understanding those subtle cues, frustration, anger, fear, it can be absolutely crucial when you're trying to de-escalate a situation.
It's funny how we think of communication as being all about the words we say, but our body language, it speaks volumes, right? So what kind of things does this guide have to say about reading and responding to those nonverbal cues?
Well, it actually breaks down a bunch of common body language signals and what they could mean. Let's say you're talking to a patient and they suddenly cross their arms.
Oh, yeah, it could be a sign that they're getting defensive, like they don't feel heard or understood.
Exactly. Or what about if a patient's posture changes really suddenly?
Ooh, yeah, that's a little more alarming. Could mean they're getting agitated or even possibly aggressive.
Exactly. It's all about picking up on those small changes in their energy, their demeanor.
So what are healthcare workers supposed to do with this knowledge? It's not like they can control someone else's body language.
Right. It's not about control. It's about being aware and adapting. The guide talks about what it calls synchronizing your body language.
Synchronizing? Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Does that mean mirroring them, subtly copying their body language?
Mirroring can be a part of it, but it's more nuanced. It's really about using your own body language to build a sense of trust and rapport.
So if you want to put someone at ease, you need to actually embody that calmness, that composure yourself.
Exactly. And that can be surprisingly effective when you're trying to de-escalate something.
It's amazing how much is going on beneath the surface, right?
Yeah.
We might not even realize it, but our bodies are constantly sending and receiving all these little signals.
And in a high-pressure setting like healthcare, being tuned into those signals can make all the difference.
It's like having this extra layer of awareness, this sixth sense to help you navigate those really complex social dynamics.
That's a great way to put it. That heightened awareness can literally be the difference between a situation getting out of control or calming down.
Speaking of calming things down, does the guide give any specific advice on how to handle situations when they do start to escalate? I mean, body language can only get you so far if someone is really intent on hurting you.
Well, absolutely. And that's why the guide actually goes beyond just prevention. It gets into specific strategies for those moments when things get really real, and some of them are pretty surprising.
Okay, now you've got me curious. Tell me, is it more than just the usual carry pepper spray advice?
Well, they do mention deterrents, like using strong citrus smells.
Wait, really? Citrus smells?
I know it sounds weird, but apparently certain scents can really throw people off, and they say some people find strong citrus smells especially offensive.
It's like a sensory deterrent, kind of? That's wild. I'd never even considered that.
Right. It's all about understanding those less obvious vulnerabilities. But yeah, they also talk about more traditional stuff like security systems, strategic lighting.
Like well-lit parking lots, security cameras, that kind of thing.
Right, exactly. But they also talk about this thing called soft roads. Have you ever heard of those?
Soft roads. Can't say that I have. What in the world is a soft road?
Okay, so imagine flooring that's actually designed to make someone lose their balance.
Oh, wow. So if someone tries to, charge or attack, they'd have trouble getting a good footing.
Exactly. It's a less lethal way to stop someone and give you time to get help.
Okay, that's some next-level security thinking.
Yeah.
That's got to be more common in, higher-risk areas, right? Or maybe hospitals that have already had incidents.
You're right, it's not in every doctor's office.
Yeah.
But they make a good point that even simple things like how you arrange the furniture can make a difference.
So being mindful of sightlines, escape routes, not letting yourself get cornered if things go south.
Exactly. It's about making the space feel safe, giving yourself options.
This is also fascinating. It's like this whole other dimension of safety I never even thought about.
It really is. It's not just about physical security. It's also about understanding the psychology behind aggression and using that to de-escalate things as much as possible.
Being prepared, not paranoid.
Right. Exactly. Knowledge is power. And in this case, it can quite literally save lives.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll dive into the guide's self-defense recommendations and see what other surprises it has in store for us. Don't go anywhere. Okay, so we've talked about, preventative measures and recognizing those early warning signs. But what happens when things actually escalate? when it becomes clear that someone is really going to try to hurt you.
That's when those self-defense recommendations become really important. And you're right, it goes way beyond just carrying pepper spray.
Right, because in the heat of the moment, just having it on you doesn't guarantee anything. You need to know how to use it, when to use it. It's more complicated than it seems.
Totally. And that's one thing I really liked about the guide, how it emphasizes that your response has to fit the situation. They actually break it down by attack scenarios. They talk about long range, medium range, close range, sudden attacks, and then those ones that kind of build more slowly.
So you have to figure out what kind of attack you're dealing with and react accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference, like practically speaking? I mean, it seems like it would change your options a lot if the attacker's across the room versus right up in your face.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Distance is key, and they talk about that a lot. Like, if you're further away, you have more options for getting away, maybe calling for help.
Right, the whole flight part of fight or flight.
Oh,
Putting
yeah.
some space between you buys you time to think.
Exactly. But if someone's already right there, up close, those tactics change. They talk a lot about using your voice, not just to get help, but to try to, de-escalate, maybe even disarm the attacker.
You mean like yelling for help? Or trying to reason with them?
That's part of it, but they also talk about, really using your voice assertively. Sometimes just a firm voice, a commanding presence, can be enough to make someone back off.
Projecting that aura of confidence, even if you're terrified on the inside. Right.
Exactly. And of course, if that doesn't work, the guide does get into some actual self-defense moves. Simple but effective stuff.
Okay, now you have to tell me more. What kind of moves are we talking about here?
Well, they talk about targeting vulnerable areas, eyes, nose, throat, if you need to disable someone quickly.
Yeah, that makes sense. But that also seems like it would take so much, mental toughness to actually do that to someone, even in a life or death situation.
Oh, absolutely. And the guide is really good about stressing that physical self-defense should always be the absolute last resort. They also spend a lot of time on the legal side of things.
Oh, right. Because it's not just about knowing how to fight back. It's also about understanding the law. The last thing you need after fending off an attacker is to get in trouble with the law yourself.
Exactly. They're really clear about making sure you know the laws in your area about self-defense, what they call reasonable force. They even recommend talking to a lawyer to make sure you really understand your rights.
That's good advice for anyone, really. But it just highlights how stressful, how potentially dangerous this whole thing is for healthcare workers. They have this whole other layer of safety and risk to deal with.
Absolutely. And it takes a toll. The guide doesn't sugarcoat that. It talks about the mental and emotional impact this kind of violence has.
Well, yeah, it makes sense. It's one thing to be prepared for a physical attack, but how do you even prepare for the emotional fallout? There's got to be a lot to process.
It is. And it's often this hidden wound, it can stick with you long after any physical injuries are gone.
Yeah. It seems like it would be easy to feel vulnerable after something like that, maybe even a little paranoid.
Absolutely. The guide talks about that, and they really emphasize how important it is to get support, talking to coworkers, finding a therapist, anything healthy to help process what happened.
It's like, it's okay to not be okay, right? You don't have to be this superhuman who just shrugs off traumatic experiences.
Exactly. They really stress that it's healthier to process those feelings, not just bottle them up and try to act tough, which unfortunately is so common in these high-stress jobs.
Especially healthcare, right? There's this expectation that you have to be strong for your patients, hold it all together. But doctors, nurses, they're human too. They have feelings, they get scared, and they need time to heal.
100%. And that's why there's this whole section on self-care. It's not selfish, it's essential, they say.
Right, because if you're burnt out, if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not going to be able to give your best to your patients anyway.
Exactly. It's about creating a whole culture of awareness, preparedness, and support.
And it sounds like documentation is a big part of that support system.
Oh, yeah. They're really specific about reporting incidents, even the ones that seem really minor.
Which I can see being hard. It's like admitting you were vulnerable, maybe even that you didn't handle it as well as you think you should have.
Right, which is understandable. But they really stress that reporting isn't about blaming anyone. It's about seeing the bigger picture. Are there patterns? Are there ways to improve safety? And of course, it creates a record if something does happen, legally speaking.
So it's about protecting yourself and your coworkers in the long run, creating a safer workplace for everyone.
Exactly. They suggest keeping really detailed records, dates, times, what happened, who saw it, any evidence like photos or footage from security cameras.
Wow, so like building a case file even if you never have to use it.
Exactly. It's about being prepared.
Mm-hmm.
And that preparation, it goes beyond just documentation. They talk a lot about creating support networks too.
Because if you're dealing with this stuff alone, it's so isolating. It would be easy to feel overwhelmed.
You're so right. They suggest support groups, workshops, training sessions, even just checking in with each other more often. Little things can make a huge difference.
Like they say, there's strength in numbers, right? Knowing you're not alone can really change your whole perspective.
Totally. And in this case, those numbers can be the difference between feeling helpless or feeling empowered to actually do something.
Now, that's a powerful message. Creating a culture where everyone feels like they can speak up, they can support each other, they've got each other's backs.
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, we're all in this together, right?
We are. This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like I've learned so much.
Yeah.
But before we move on, was there anything else about those support systems that really stood out to you?
You know, one thing that really resonated with me was how the guide talked about the power of shared experience. Like, it actually encourages healthcare workers to see these challenges, even the really tough ones, the traumatic ones, as opportunities to, like, learn and grow together.
It's like that whole idea of post-traumatic growth, right? Even after going through something awful, we can still find meaning, we can build resilience, even discover new strengths we didn't know we had.
Exactly. And the guide makes the case that sharing those experiences, whether it's in a support group, through mentoring, or even just talking to each other, it can be incredibly healing. It creates the sense of, like, we're all in this together, and it helps fight the stigma that's often attached to mental health, especially in those high-pressure fields.
Right, because no one wants to feel like they're the only one who's struggling.
Right.
Right. So it makes those feelings of vulnerability feel less, well, vulnerable. It reminds everyone that it's okay to feel afraid or anxious or even angry when you're facing these kinds of threats.
Absolutely. And the guide argues that by opening up that dialogue, by making it okay to talk about this stuff, we can start to change the whole culture of healthcare. It's about moving away from that suck it up mentality and moving towards a more supportive, more compassionate approach to workplace safety.
And that change, it doesn't stop at the hospital doors, right? It sends a message to everyone that violence against healthcare workers is unacceptable. It's a community issue. We all have a responsibility to create a safer, more respectful environment for the people who are out there taking care of us.
You got it. Collective responsibility. Which actually takes us back to something we were talking about earlier, the guide's emphasis on documentation. It's not just about covering yourself legally, it's also about contributing to this bigger picture, creating a record that can actually be used to prevent these things from happening in the future.
It's like every incident report, every witness statement, every piece of evidence, it all adds up. We can use that information to make real change.
Exactly. It's like crowdsourcing safety, right?
And the guide really encourages healthcare institutions to make those reports seriously, analyze them, use that data to improve their security, their training, their entire approach.
So it's not just about reacting after something bad happens. It's about getting ahead of the problem. Precisely. It's about creating a culture of awareness, prevention, and support. And it's about empowering healthcare workers to prioritize their own safety, their own well-being, without feeling like they're going to be judged or punished for it.
This has been an incredible conversation. Seriously, I've learned so much. But before we wrap up, is there like one big takeaway you hope people listening will remember?
If I had to pick just one, I'd say it's this. Knowledge is power. By learning about the risks, understanding the psychology behind these situations, developing those self-defense skills, building up our resilience, by demanding better, safer workplaces, we can actually make a difference.
So well said. And it's important to remember that this isn't just a problem for healthcare workers to solve on their own. This is a societal issue. It takes all of us.
Absolutely. And it starts with conversations like these, raising awareness, challenging the way things are, and fighting for the people who are out there taking care of us.
I'll have said it better myself. This deep dive has been, eye-opening, to say the least. And for everyone listening, we've actually included links to that medical defense guide and some other resources in the show notes. So definitely check those out, share them around. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay safe.